So I'd like to introduce Claudia Cotton from the Forest Service and Kentucky, Daniel Boone National Forest.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claudia Cotton. I'm the forest soil scientist with the Daniel Boone National Forest. And this afternoon, I'm going to lead us into this forest soils moisture session. And by talking about the implications of soil moisture on forest management operations, and especially in relation to plastic soils. As soon as it goes forward. Let's see, am I missing something? Okay, here, let me see if this will work. Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. Great start. All right. So before I get into the meat of this presentation, I would like to thank the following people up here. Without their support, I would not be here and a part of this group. Cindy and Marena and Stephanie, Jerry, Rich, Russ, Mac, and Kevin Beck down here. They were responsible for bringing the mesonet to one of the first national forests in the nation. So for those of you that don't know, the Daniel Boone National Forest is located on the Cumberland Plateau in eastern Kentucky. We have a boundary within which we can purchase land of 1.2 million. However, we only actually manage 710,000 acres out of that. And that's what you see here in the green. So a couple of months ago, our timber contracting officer approached me and he said that his foresters were having some problems with rutting across the forest. And he said, can you put together a training for them that will help them identify the importance of these soils? And I was like, absolutely, I can do that. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you all some of the issues that we deal with regard to soil moisture in a management context. So when he came to me with this issue, the first two places I went for information were the forest plan and the forest environmental impact statement. So every national forest across the United States has a forest plan, and it includes the goals, the objectives, and the standards by which that forest is managed. And goals and objectives are nice, but standards are carry the same weight as law. And often they're put into place to preserve impacts to resources, to natural resources. The environmental impact statement, if you ever want to know anything about the natural history of the natural resources on a particular forest, go to that environmental impact statement. There is a wealth of knowledge in there. And these are all, both of these documents are available online if you type in a national forest and go to their official website under planning. So when I went to look for some references to rutting, I found exactly 3 instances. The first 2 were not helpful whatsoever. The first is in regards to rare community management. The second is in regard to SHPO consultation, struck out. Third, we're getting a little bit closer. We see that ruts, can form gullies. So yes, we're getting at least in the ballpark. So as I searched further, I did find some references to plastic and to some plastic limits. Now, if you're a soil scientist or an engineer, you understand that these properties are very important for slope stability. So essentially, plasticity is a quality of a soil that when there's a certain moisture level, it acts more like a plastic instead of a semi-solid. And so when you have certain moisture levels in that anaplastic soil and you put heavy machinery on it, you can have permanent or at very least long-term deformation of those soils, and it just destroys the soil texture. So, okay, I'm taking this group way back to Soils 100. I just want to focus on clays here. So clay, as we know, is the smallest particle size, right? It has more surface area than it does internal area. And they also orient themselves horizontally, and they into aluminosilicate layers. Now, these layers hold water very tightly. It's hard for water to get in there, but once water is in a clay soil, it absolutely holds it, and it can make a slope heavier from the weight. So this shows how basically runoff and infiltration of the 3 textures. So you can see we've got a lot of runoff on these clay soils. And on the flip side, like I said, once water gets in them, the weight of that slope increases dramatically. So why should we care about plastic soils across any forest? Essentially, a plastic soil is one with a lot of clay. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, in that if we have an idea of what we're going to do as a project on a national forest, and we know what pieces of land we're going to manage, we can look at the soil properties and we can predict what kind of problems we're going to have in the future and relocate those activities so that we don't have detrimental soil damage. So these soils, when wet, they're much more sensitive to long-term damage than silt or sand-based soils. Dry soils, even dry plastic soils, can handle heavy loads. We can operate on these soils as long as they stay dry and drained. However, when they don't stay dry and drained, we can impose some serious damage. Plastic soils are especially susceptible to rutting whenever they're wet. Ruts reduce soil productivity through compaction, the removal of valuable topsoil, and the removal of vegetation. You'll have to bear with me. My mouth gets ahead of my brain sometimes. This increases erosion, it reduces infiltration and aeration, and it severely delays plant germination and development. So Deb Page Dumrose out in Moscow, she put together this great soil disturbance field guide that is available online, and it gives you classes of soil disturbance in visual categories so that we can give these to our foresters and be like, this is what's going on. When you see this, stay off of this. All right, so ruts can also lead to gully erosion, as I listed earlier. If you look here, I'll tell you the story of this site here shortly, but we had some detrimental soil damage, and from the height of this yellow line down to the soil surface was 2 feet. And so we had serious erosion that occurred in this area, and just below this is a lake and a series of wetlands. So this was right after I started. I think they were trying to get me to quit. Ruts can also lead to gullies. It can also lead to soil displacement. Soil displacement is a result of scraping with blades, turning of tracks or wheels, or the dragging of whole trees. So you all know that surface soils are key to forest productivity. And once you lose that organic matter in those surface soils, it's going to take a long time for this soil to recover. Subsoils tend to be more erodible, so once those surface soils are gone, it is on for those subsoils because the textures are so fine. A final reason we need to be concerned about plastic soils are landslides and slope instability. So this was a situation where we had a coal seam. See, there's not a pointer. We had a coal seam. We had the convergence of a coal seam that emitted water, a full bench cut road. The road had side cast over to the side. The water out of the coal seam hit that side cast, hit those soils, and down the slope came. And the slope, as you can see, we've got a pretty decent slope angle there as well. So now, how do we identify plastic soils? The creators of our forest plan knew something about plastic soils when they put it together, because this is one of those standards in our forest plan that I was talking about earlier. We cannot put heavy equipment on plastic soils whenever the water table is within 12 inches or exceeds the plastic limit. And so they not only said, here's what you need to do, here's how you find out if the soil is plastic or not. So if you're a soil scientist or an engineer, this is a pretty simple test. You take a ball of soil. If you can roll it into a pencil without it breaking, then that moisture content is too high for heavy equipment to be operating on it. Another place that you can get a lot of information, which I'm sure you all know, is Web Soil Survey. I commonly pull down clay content and the plasticity index of the soil mapping units for the units where we are proposing to manage. So now that I had all this data, I'm like, okay, numbers are great, but I need some context. What do these numbers mean? So when I started digging into the engineering literature, I found evidence to suggest that a plasticity index of 17 is where we need to draw a line, as far as these are the soils that we need to make sure that we follow this standard and look at. So where are the plastic soils across the landscape? In our forest plan EIS, it does indicate that we have these Mississippian geologic shale formations that weather into plastic clays that when we have a rapid rise in groundwater, they're susceptible to slumping. And most of these formations are found in the lower slope positions down in the riparian zone to start with, so they're wet. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of damage from problems from driving on plastic soils. And I want you all to note the plasticity index, or the PI. It's a lot easier to get out of my mouth than all those syllables. So this was a timber sale. Again, I think they were trying to get me to quit with some pretty decent damage, but it was quite local. It was this one spot down in here, and you can see the smearing. It's going to take a long time for those soils to recover. I'm going to revisit this spot. Now, this necessarily wasn't due to a plastic soil. Rather, it was a gas well road that went straight up a nose slope without water control. And this was just straight up erosion. Without any water control or BMPs put into place. This is on our southern district. This is the highest PI. So look what happened here. I mean, these folks came across us and they tore us to pieces on this while it was wet. So I'm going to revisit this from where I was a bit earlier. And this is hilarious. This guy decided he was going to put a cabin on his inholding on us and cross us to get it. Envision this: 18% slope at the bottom, 25% slope on the main part of the road. He is pulling it up with the low boy. The cabin falls off. He gets a dozer and pushes it the rest of the way up the slope. Okay. And this is what happened. So I went out there and I looked at it and I was like, oh, he did a number here. Okay. So here, I want you to look. Where that picture was taken was right here. This is one of those problematic shale formations right here. And so I was curious. I'm like, why do we have detrimental soil damage up here where the slope is like, super steep? And not down here, or why we had it 8 feet. So I started pulling up. I got curious. I pulled up Web Soil Survey. Here is the plasticity index map for that same area. And if you look, this is Latham silt loam right here in the bottom. This is where we had the soil damage. The PI for that is 22.4. The other soil, this is where the 25% road was up in here, which is Cranston, Bradley, silt loam. It's 4.8. So that really put a light bulb off in my head whenever I started seeing that. And I'm like, this is something I can give to my foresters. Oh, right on. Thank you. Okay, thanks. I think that's it though. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. Okay, thank you. How to avoid ruts. First off, we need to comply with our forest plan. And by doing that, whenever I analyze the soils for a project, I create a map. And I include that in my specialist report to show them the soils that they need to absolutely operate. We need to have limits on operational seasons. Sorry about that. The second thing is that when we do put roads on the land, we have got to keep operations on these soils as dry as possible through location, through proper BMP implementation and maintenance. And then finally, if ruts do occur, fix them as soon as possible and avoid that area, avoid the repaired area, and keep it out of any further operations. So I want to wind this back up. Last year I came and I spoke about our Mesonet project, and we had one station installed. We are installing another station right now. And I had hoped to pull all that data together and give you all a presentation on that. However, Our data looks like this at this point, and I didn't have the time to crunch it all through and get it. So next year, I do hope to have all of this put together and give you all a presentation on how our mesonet data is informing some of these management problems that we're seeing across the forest. I appreciate y'all's time this afternoon, and I'll be glad to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Are there any questions for Claudia?
It was very interesting. I really enjoyed hearing about that. I'm a fellow Forest Service employee, so wonderful. A question for you is, others in the audience may be aware, but your mesonet sites where you set up, are they on your problem soils? Are they on different soils or variety of soils? I'm just kind of curious, thinking about how you set that up and how that's going to help you in the future.
Claudia, could you speak into the mic?
Thank you. I thought I spoke loud enough, but not for this crowd. Okay, thanks. Okay, so when we set up mesonet sites, there are very defined qualifications, or not qualifications, but characteristics of an area that they want to have, such as security, such as regular maintenance, such as all different kinds of things. And because of that, we were a bit limited on where we put those. But to answer the first part of your question, they are different soils underneath the two. We've got a station on the north part of the forest and a station on the far south part of the forest. Yeah.